The Sterling Global Tower pierced the night sky like a blade of glass and steel, 47 floors of ambition wrapped in smoke and flame. Fire licked the upper windows, transforming the luxury high-rise into a torch against the darkness. Below, crowds pressed against police barriers, their faces painted orange by the inferno's glow. Sirens wailed through the city streets as more units arrived, but the firefighters stood frozen, watching the building burn. Too hot, too high, too dangerous. Inside that blazing tower, on the top floor where the flames danced closest to heaven, Billionaire CEO Olivia Sterling was trapped. The captain's radio crackled with the impossible order to wait for specialized equipment. That's when Ethan Carter ripped off his oxygen mask, his eyes wild, with a determination that transcended protocol. "She's all I have left," he roared. Though he wasn't thinking of the billionaire at all, he was thinking of his 7-year-old daughter Lily, and how he couldn't let another soul slip away on his watch. The flames roared their challenge as he charged into the inferno, his silhouette swallowed by the firestorm. He was only a struggling single dad, but in this inferno his courage would reveal truth, humble power, and inspire respect no money could ever buy. The morning before the fire had started like any other in the cramped 2-bedroom apartment Ethan Carter shared with his daughter. Sunlight filtered through worn curtains as he prepared Lily's favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese, just the way her mother used to make them. The kitchen table wobbled on its uneven leg, a stack of overdue bills serving as a makeshift stabilizer. Ethan's hands, scarred from countless rescues, moved with practiced grace as he packed Lily's lunchbox, adding the note he wrote every day. "Daddy loves you to the moon and back." At 36, Ethan carried the weight of loss in the lines around his eyes. 3 years had passed since cancer took Sarah, leaving him to navigate parenthood alone, while working double shifts at Station 19. His uniform hung by the door, patches worn but proud, the badge reading E. Carter polished to a shine despite everything else in their life being second-hand. Lily bounded into the kitchen, her dark curls bouncing, wearing the princess dress she'd gotten from the thrift store. At 7 years old, she possessed her mother's smile and her father's unwavering spirit. Her backpack, decorated with hand-drawn fire trucks and superheroes, bumped against her small frame as she climbed onto her chair. "Daddy, Mrs. Johnson says we're having a special visitor at school today," she announced, spreading grape jelly on her toast with the concentration of a surgeon. "A real CEO lady who owns buildings." Ethan ruffled her hair, hiding his exhaustion from the night shift. "That sounds exciting, sweetheart." Lily's eyes sparkled with pride. "I told everyone my daddy saves people from buildings. You're better than any CEO, because you're a real hero." Those words would echo in Ethan's mind hours later, as he stood before the burning tower. Across the city, in a penthouse that cost more than Ethan would earn in 10 lifetimes, Olivia Sterling stood before floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sunrise paint the cityscape gold. At 34, she commanded an empire built on steel and ambition, her platinum blonde waves perfectly styled, her designer suit worth more than most people's cars. The world saw her as untouchable, the ice queen of the corporate world who'd inherited Sterling Global from her father and transformed it into a multinational powerhouse. But behind the carefully constructed facade, Olivia felt the familiar emptiness that no amount of success could fill. Her phone buzzed with the day's first crisis. Another hostile takeover to manage. Another board meeting where old men would question her every decision, despite her proven track record. She pressed her manicured fingers against the cool glass, wondering when she'd last felt anything real, anything that wasn't calculated or strategic. Richard Sterling's voice boomed from her home office, already on his 3rd conference call of the morning. At 65, her father remained the shadow power behind Sterling Global, his iron grip on both the company and his daughter never loosening despite his official retirement. Richard had built his fortune on the backs of others, crushing competitors with the casual cruelty of someone who'd forgotten what it meant to struggle. "Olivia," he called sharply, "the Providence development needs your signature. Don't go soft on the eviction notices." She closed her eyes, remembering the families in those buildings, the children who would lose their homes. But Richard Sterling didn't raise his daughter to have a conscience, he raised her to have a portfolio. In the gleaming offices of Chromatic Industries, Damian Cross studied the Sterling Global building through his telescope. his sharp gray eyes calculating. At 40, he cut an imposing figure, tall and gaunt, his blonde hair slicked back with expensive pomade, his silver-tailored suit emphasizing his predatory thinness. The diamond watch on his wrist caught the light as he swirled cognac in a crystal tumbler, even though it was barely past breakfast. Damien had spent 5 years orchestrating Sterling Global's downfall, bribing inspectors, manipulating safety reports, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Tonight's gala would provide the ideal cover. His thin lips curved into a smile that never reached his eyes as he reviewed the building's blueprints one final time, noting where the fire suppression systems had been mysteriously offline for maintenance. The security footage from those floors had already been corrupted. By tomorrow morning, Sterling Global would be ashes, and he would emerge to buy the company for pennies on the dollar. The Sterling Global Tower hosted its annual charity gala as evening descended on the city, the irony not lost on those who knew how Richard Sterling really made his money. The top-floor ballroom glittered with champagne and false laughter, the city's elite pretending to care about the cause of the weak. Olivia moved through the crowd like a ghost at her own party, shaking hands and accepting compliments that felt like chains. She'd just escaped to the balcony for a moment of peace when the first alarm sounded. Initially, everyone assumed it was a drill. Richard Sterling was notorious for his security tests. But then the smell of smoke seeped through the ventilation system, and the sprinklers remained dry. Panic rippled through the crowd as black smoke began pouring from the stairwells. The elevator banks shut down automatically, trapping 400 people above the 40th floor as flames began their deadly climb. Station 19 received the call at 8:47 p.m. Ethan had just finished reading Lily a bedtime story over video call from the station, promising he'd be home for breakfast. The alarm bell shattered the quiet moment, and he tucked his phone away with practiced speed. Commercial structure fire. Sterling Global. Multiple victims trapped. The words sent ice through his veins. He knew that building, knew its height made it a death trap if the fire suppression failed. The trucks screamed through the city streets, but Ethan's mind was already inside the building, calculating angles, remembering the layout from the last inspection. As they arrived, the scene was chaos incarnate. Flames had engulfed floors 30 through 35, creating a chimney effect that was rapidly spreading upward. The incident commander's voice crackled over the radio. "Nobody goes above the 30th floor. We wait for aerial support." But waiting meant dying for those trapped above. Ethan could hear their screams even over the roar of the flames. His partner grabbed his arm as he moved toward the entrance. "Carter! You heard the commander. It's suicide." Ethan thought of Lily's drawing on the refrigerator stick figures of him carrying people from burning buildings. "My hero daddy" scrawled in crayon above it. He thought of Sarah's last words, making him promise to always come home to their daughter. But he also thought of his oath, the promise every firefighter makes to run toward danger when others run away. The media had already arrived, their cameras capturing the drama as Ethan shrugged off his partner's grip. "Those people don't have time for aerial support," he said, checking his oxygen levels. The building's entrance loomed before him like the mouth of hell, heat shimmering from the doorway in waves that distorted reality. Inside, the Sterling Global Tower had become a vertical furnace. The supposedly fireproof stairwells had become chimneys, funneling smoke and superheated air upward. Ethan found his first victims on the 28th floor, a family of 4 who'd been attending their first fancy gala, the children crying in their parents' arms. He guided them down through the smoke, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, counting steps to keep them calm. "Stay low. Follow my voice," he commanded. His training, overriding the fear that threatened to paralyze him. The father, a construction worker based on his calloused hands, tried to thank him, but Ethan was already heading back up. Each trip became harder, the smoke thicker, the heat more oppressive. His radio crackled with orders to evacuate, but the voices from above drove him onward. On the 35th floor, he found an elderly couple who'd been separated from their group. The woman had twisted her ankle, and her husband refused to leave her side. Ethan hoisted her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, guiding the husband with his free hand. The stairs seemed endless, each step a battle against exhaustion and heat. His oxygen alarm began beeping. 20 minutes of air left. Any sane person would have turned back. But Ethan could still hear voices above. Still hear the desperate pleas for help. He deposited the couple with the medics and grabbed a fresh oxygen tank, ignoring the incident commander's direct order to stand down. The media caught it all. The lone firefighter defying orders, charging back into the inferno. Someone with a telephoto lens captured his face in that moment, the determination that transcended self-preservation. Meanwhile, 47 floors up, Olivia Sterling experienced terror for the first time in her privileged life. The ballroom had become a trap, smoke seeping through every vent, the windows too thick to break. Her father had retreated to his office with his personal security, leaving the guests to fend for themselves. She tried to maintain order, using her commanding presence to prevent a stampede. But as the smoke thickened and the temperature rose, civilization crumbled. A man in a $10,000 suit shoved an elderly woman aside to get to the balcony doors. Olivia helped the woman to a chair, tearing strips from her designer dress to create makeshift masks. The irony wasn't lost on her, all her wealth, all her power, and she was going to die in the monument to her family's greed. The hidden truth behind the fire spread through the building's bones like poison. Damian Cross's sabotage had been methodical, bribing the maintenance chief to disable sprinkler systems, ensuring the fire doors were propped open for ventilation, even coating certain structural supports with accelerants disguised as cleaning supplies. But in his arrogance, he'd underestimated the design of the building itself. Sterling Global had been built to Richard Sterling's exacting specifications, with hidden escape routes and reinforced panic rooms that weren't on any official blueprint. As Olivia led a group of survivors through smoke-filled corridors, she remembered her father's paranoid tour years ago, showing her the executive escape route, but the path led through the burning floors. They'd have to descend into the heart of the inferno to reach the reinforced stairwell on the building's north side. Ethan reached the 40th floor as his second oxygen tank hit the halfway mark. The heat was unbearable now, his protective gear smoking from the temperature. He'd saved 17 people so far, but the radio chatter told him dozens remained trapped above. The main stairwells were impassable beyond this point, consumed by flames that had turned the steel railings into glowing ribbons of heat. But Ethan remembered something from the building inspection, a service elevator that ran along the north wall, used for window washing equipment. It wouldn't be powered, but the shaft itself might provide a path upward. He found it behind a maintenance door, the shaft dark and filled with smoke but not yet consumed by flames. Without hesitation, he began to climb. Olivia's group had reached the 39th floor when the ceiling began to collapse. Flaming debris rained down as people screamed, scattering in panic. She watched in horror as a chandelier crashed through the floor, creating a hole that revealed the inferno below. They were trapped between the flames below and the smoke above, death closing in from both directions. That's when she heard it, a voice cutting through the chaos, strong and sure. "Stay calm. Move toward my voice." Through the smoke, she saw him, a firefighter. His gear blackened and smoking. His face mask cracked, but his eyes blazing with determination. He looked like he'd climbed through hell itself to reach them. The media coverage had become a citywide obsession. Every major network had cameras trained on the building, capturing the drama in real time. The narrative had already formed. Local firefighter defies orders in desperate rescue attempt. Someone had done their research, discovering Ethan's background: widowed father, working-class hero, the guy who lived paycheck to paycheck while saving lives. They'd even found Lily's school photo, the pretty 7-year-old who might lose her only parent to the flames. The incident commander had given up trying to recall Ethan, instead coordinating support for when if he emerged. The crowd below had grown to thousands, their phones raised to capture history. Their collective breath held as they watched the lone figure visible through the 40th floor windows, shepherding people toward safety. Damian Cross watched the coverage from his office, his carefully laid plans unraveling with each person Ethan saved. This wasn't supposed to happen. The building should have been evacuated too quickly for heroics. The deaths blamed on Sterling Global's negligence, not arson. But this firefighter was ruining everything, turning a corporate disaster into a human interest story. Worse, he'd received word that some of the survivors were already talking about suspicious maintenance, about fire doors that shouldn't have been open. He made a call to his contact in the building's security office, but the line was dead. Another call to his man in the fire department, went unanswered. The neat threads of his conspiracy were coming undone, and at the center of it all was a single father who wouldn't stop climbing. Back in the tower, Ethan had gotten Olivia's group to the reinforced stairwell, but the path down was blocked by a wall of fire on the 35th floor. The backup stairwell on the south side was completely gone, collapsed from the heat. They were trapped in a pocket of relative safety, but with the fire climbing and oxygen running low, it was only a matter of time. Olivia watched this firefighter, this stranger, who'd risked everything to reach them, as he calculated options with the calm of someone who'd made peace with death. "There's a window washing platform on 36, she said suddenly, remembering the maintenance reports she'd signed. "It's on the exterior. But if we could reach it." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Beneath the soot and terror, he saw something he hadn't expected: intelligence, determination, and a spark of the same desperate hope that kept him moving. The journey to the window-washing platform became a dance with death. Ethan led them through offices that were already beginning to burn, the carpet melting beneath their feet, the windows cracking from thermal stress. He used his axe to break through doors, creating a path where none existed. Olivia stayed close, helping to guide the others, her designer heels long discarded, her feet bleeding but moving. When an elderly board member collapsed from smoke inhalation, she helped Ethan carry him. When a young intern froze in terror at the sight of flames licking through a doorway, she talked him through it with a voice steady despite her own fear. Together, they moved 15 people through hell. Inch by inch. Breath by breath. The platform was designed for 2 people, maybe 3. They had 15. Ethan did the math quickly. It would take multiple trips, and the motor was already smoking from the heat. He sent the first group down with clear instructions. Don't stop for anything. When you hit the 20th floor, jump to the fire ladder, the truck will be waiting. Olivia moved to join the second group, but Ethan stopped her. "You go last," he said. "These people trust you. They need to see you're not abandoning them." She nodded, understanding passing between them. As the platform descended with agonizing slowness, she found herself studying this man who'd appeared from nowhere to save them. His name tag read E. Carter, and she wondered what the E stood for. Wondered who was waiting for him at home. 3 trips. That's what it took to get everyone down. By the 3rd trip, the platform's motor was failing, grinding and sparking. Ethan and Olivia were the last 2, the building groaning around them as structural supports began to fail. As they descended, she asked him, "Why did you come up?" "The others said you were ordered not to." He was quiet for a moment, watching the floors pass by, each one a fresh hell of flames and smoke. "My daughter draws pictures of me saving people," he finally said. "I couldn't let her down. Couldn't let those people down. My wife died 3 years ago, cancer took her slowly, and I couldn't do anything but watch. I swore I'd never just watch again." The platform lurched, dropping 3 feet before catching. They were passing through the heart of the fire now, the heat so intense that Olivia's skin felt like it was burning even through Ethan's protective embrace as he shielded her with his body. They made it to the 20th floor just as the platform's motor seized completely. The fire ladder was extended, waiting, but there was a 10-foot gap. Ethan looked at the distance, then at Olivia. "You're going to have to jump," he said. "I'll steady you." She looked at the gap, at the 100-foot drop below, at the flames racing up the building's exterior. "I can't," she whispered, the first time those words had ever crossed her lips. "Yes, you can," Ethan said firmly. "Your father built this empire on the idea that Sterlings never fail. Prove him right. But for the right reasons this time." Something in his words, in the absolute faith in his eyes, gave her strength. She jumped. The investigation began even before the flames were fully extinguished. Fire investigators found evidence of arson within hours: accelerants, tampered safety systems, and security footage that had been mysteriously corrupted. The trail led back to Chromatic Industries, to a web of bribes and corporate espionage that would have been perfect if not for one thing. Damian Cross had gotten sloppy. In his haste to cover his tracks after the failed murder attempt, he'd left digital footprints. Banking records showing payments to building maintenance staff. Email chains discussing the Sterling problem. Even a recorded phone call where he'd explicitly mentioned making sure the sprinklers stayed off. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, Richard Sterling's own paranoid surveillance system, hidden cameras he'd installed without telling anyone, including his daughter. Olivia sat in a hospital room, watching the news coverage while being treated for smoke inhalation. Her father hadn't come to check on her. He was too busy in crisis management mode, trying to spin the narrative to salvage the company's reputation. But all she could think about was Ethan Carter, who was 3 rooms down being treated for second-degree burns and exhaustion. She'd learned his first name from the nurse's Ethan. She'd learned about Lily from the news coverage, seen the little girl crying at the fire station, begging to know if her daddy was okay. The media had painted him as a hero, but Olivia knew the truth was both simpler and more profound. He was a father who'd kept his promise to always fight for others, even when it might cost him everything. Richard Sterling arrived at the hospital the next morning, not to see his daughter, but to control the narrative. He swept into Olivia's room with his usual entourage, already dictating press releases to his assistant. "We'll spin this as a triumph of Sterling Global's emergency protocols," he was saying. "Make sure to minimize the firefighter angle. We don't need a working-class hero overshadowing the brand." Olivia watched him with new eyes, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. "His name is Ethan Carter," she said quietly. Richard waved dismissively. "Whatever his name is, make sure he signs an NDA before he leaves. We can't have him giving interviews that might imply negligence." Something inside Olivia, something that had been frozen for years, finally cracked. "No," she said. The word hung in the air like a challenge. The confrontation that followed would later be described by nurses as volcanic. Olivia Sterling, the ice queen of the corporate world, stood up to her father with a fury that had been building for 34 years. She'd seen real courage, real sacrifice, and it had shown her the emptiness of everything Richard Sterling represented. "You would have let those people die," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You retreated to your panic room with your security while guests at our gala burned. A man making less in a year than you spend on lunch risked his life to save them, and you want to silence him?" Richard's face purpled. "You're being emotional. This is business." But Olivia was done with business as usual. She thought of Ethan shielding her with his body as they descended through flames. Thought of Lily's tear-stained face on the news. Thought of all the families living in buildings her father wanted to demolish. The second attack came that night. Damian Cross, desperate now, had decided that eliminating witnesses was his only option. He'd hired professionals this time, men who specialized in making problems disappear. Their target was the hospital where the key witnesses were recovering, including Ethan and Olivia. But Damian had underestimated something crucial: the Brotherhood of Firefighters. Station 19 had set up a rotating guard around Ethan's room, off-duty firefighters who'd come to protect one of their own. When 3 men in maintenance uniforms tried to access the secure ward at 2 a.m., it was a veteran firefighter named Martinez who noticed their shoes' expensive leather, not the practical footwear of real maintenance workers. The ensuing fight was brief but violent. The would-be assassins hadn't expected resistance, certainly not from firefighters who fought with the fury of people defending family. But the real shock came when one of the attackers, cornered and desperate, pulled a gun. The shot echoed through the hospital corridor, just as Ethan, awakened by the commotion, stepped out of his room. Without thinking, without hesitation, he shoved Olivia back into her doorway as the bullet meant for her struck him in the shoulder. He fell, blood spreading across the hospital gown, and Olivia's scream cut through the chaos like a blade. She dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the wound, her designer facade completely shattered as she begged him to stay conscious. The twist came from Lily. The 7-year-old had been staying with Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who often watched her when Ethan worked nights. But Lily was her father's daughter, brave, determined, and unwilling to sit idle while her dad was hurt. She'd snuck out. Mrs. Chen had fallen asleep watching television and made her way to the hospital on foot, a journey of 12 blocks through the city at night. She arrived just as the police were arresting the attackers, pushed past the chaos with the single-minded determination of a child, and found her way to her father's room. The sight that greeted her Ethan pale and bandaged, Olivia holding his hand while crying, would have broken most children. But Lily climbed onto the bed, careful of her father's injuries, and said with perfect clarity, "It's okay, Daddy. Heroes don't die. They just get stronger." The investigation accelerated after the hospital attack. The arrested men quickly gave up Damien Cross to save themselves, and the evidence mountain grew into an avalanche. It turned out the Sterling Global fire was just the latest in a series of accidents that had befallen Richard Sterling's competitors over the years. Damien had been Richard's secret weapon, the attack dog who did the dirty work while Richard kept his hands clean. But this time, Damien had gone rogue, targeting Sterling Global itself in a bid to take over the empire. The FBI got involved. The SEC opened an investigation. 20 years of corporate crimes began to unravel, and at the center of it all was Richard Sterling, the titan of industry whose empire had been built on ashes and bones. Olivia took control with a ruthlessness her father would have admired if it hadn't been directed at him. She called an emergency board meeting from her hospital room, appearing via video link with bandages still visible on her arms. With surgical precision, she laid out the evidence of her father's crimes, Damien's betrayal, and the systematic corruption that had infected Sterling Global. The board members, many of whom had profited from Richard's methods, tried to resist. But Olivia had something they didn't expect: public opinion. The story had gone viral. The billionaire heiress who'd been saved by a working-class hero, who'd stood with him against assassins, who was now standing against her own father for justice. The board faced a choice: side with Olivia, or watch the company burn in the court of public opinion. Richard Sterling's arrest was captured by every major news outlet. The mighty titan, the man who'd crushed unions and demolished communities, was led away in handcuffs while protesters cheered. But the real moment of justice came during Damien Cross's interrogation. Desperate to cut a deal, he revealed everything: offshore accounts, bribed officials, a judge who'd been paid to rule in Sterling Global's favor, even a senator who'd pushed through legislation to benefit Richard's interests. The corruption was systemic, a cancer that had metastasized throughout the city's power structure. But now it was exposed, burning in the light of truth, just as the Sterling Global Tower had burned in the night. The press conference 3 weeks later was held in the rebuilt lobby of Sterling Global. Olivia stood at the podium, her platinum hair pulled back simply, her outfit understated, no longer the Ice Queen but something more authentic. Beside her stood Ethan, his arms still in a sling but his presence steady and strong. Lily held his other hand, wearing her best dress and a proud smile. 3 weeks ago, Olivia began, her voice carrying across the packed room. A fire revealed the truth about Sterling Global, not just the physical vulnerabilities of our building, but the moral vulnerabilities of our leadership. A man risked everything to save people he'd never met, while those in power hid and schemed. She paused, looking at Ethan. He didn't just save my life that night. He showed me what it means to truly live with courage, with integrity, with love, for others above self. The reforms she announced were sweeping. Safety overhauls for all Sterling properties, a fund for victims of her father's predatory practices, positions on the board for worker representatives, and most symbolically, the renaming of the rebuilt tower. The Carter Sterling Building, honoring not just the man who'd saved it, but the values he represented. My father believed in power through fear, Olivia continued. But I've learned that real power comes from respect, the kind that can't be bought or inherited, only earned through action. She turned to Ethan then, and in front of the world, she bowed. Not a casual nod, but a deep, genuine bow of respect. The cameras captured it all. The billionaire humbling herself before the firefighter, acknowledging a courage that no amount of money could purchase. Ethan was uncomfortable with the attention, shifting slightly as hundreds of cameras focused on him. But when the reporters asked him to speak, he found his voice. "I just did my job," he said simply. Every firefighter, every paramedic, every person who runs toward danger instead of away, we're not heroes. We're just people who've decided that others matter more than our own safety. The real hero is anyone who chooses to help instead of hide, to build instead of burn. He looked down at Lily, who was beaming up at him. My daughter asked me once why I became a firefighter. I told her it was because I wanted her to grow up in a world where people take care of each other. What Miss Sterling is doing, that's the world I want for her. The transformation of Sterling Global, became a case study in corporate redemption. Under Olivia's leadership, the company pivoted from predatory development to sustainable community building. The executives who'd enabled Richard's crimes were replaced with leaders who understood that profit and principle weren't mutually exclusive. But the real change was in Olivia herself. The Ice Queen melted, revealing a woman who'd been frozen by her father's expectations and thawed by witnessing genuine heroism. She instituted a policy where every Sterling Global executive had to spend 1 day a month working alongside firefighters, paramedics, or other first responders, understanding the real cost of corporate negligence. 6 months after the fire, the Carter Sterling building hosted its first event, a fundraiser for the families of fallen firefighters. The top floor, once a symbol of exclusive wealth, was now a community space. Ethan attended in his dress uniform, still uncomfortable in formal settings, but there to support the cause. Lily wore a new dress, this one bought with the education fund Olivia had quietly established for her. The little girl had become something of a mascot for the reformed company, her drawings of firefighters decorating the executive offices. As the evening progressed, Olivia found herself standing beside Ethan on the balcony where she'd stood alone the night of the fire. "You saved more than lives that night," she said softly. "You saved souls, including mine." The relationship that developed between them was slow, careful, built on mutual respect rather than attraction alone. Ethan had to overcome his distrust of wealth and power, while Olivia had to learn to live without the armor of her corporate persona. But Lily, with the wisdom of children, saw what the adults were too cautious to admit. "Miss Olivia makes Daddy smile," she told Mrs. Chen one day. "Not the pretend smile he does when he's tired, but the real smile, like when Mommy was here." She'd started drawing pictures of 3 figures now herself, her daddy, and a blonde woman who stood with them against a backdrop of buildings that touched the sky but never burned. The trial of Richard Sterling and Damian Cross became the most watched legal proceeding in the city's history. Both men, accustomed to buying their way out of consequences, found themselves facing justice that couldn't be bribed or intimidated. Richard's defense tried to paint him as a successful businessman persecuted for his achievements, but the evidence was overwhelming. Secretly recorded conversations where he discussed removing obstacles, which had resulted in 3 deaths. Financial records showing systematic tax evasion and money laundering. Testimony from dozens of families whose homes had been destroyed by his developments. Damian Cross, faced with life in prison, took a plea deal and testified against his former partner, revealing the full scope of their crimes with the cold precision of a man who'd kept receipts on everyone, including himself. The verdict was delivered on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Richard Sterling, guilty on all counts, sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. Damian Cross, guilty 30 years with possibility of parole in 15 if he continued cooperating. As Richard was led away, he passed Olivia in the courthouse hallway. For a moment, father and daughter stood facing each other. "You destroyed everything I built," he said bitterly. Olivia's response was calm, measured, free of the anger that had once consumed her. "No, Dad. You destroyed it the moment you decided people were expendable. I'm just building something better from the ashes." He was led away, and Olivia never looked back, walking forward into a future she was creating on her own terms. The city held a ceremony 1 year after the fire. The Carter Sterling building stood complete, its glass and steel reaching toward the sky but somehow seeming warmer, more welcoming than before. In the plaza below, a memorial had been erected not to power or wealth, but to the 17 people who'd died in the fire, and to all the first responders who'd risked everything to save others. Ethan was promoted to captain, though he'd tried to refuse, saying he didn't need recognition, but Chief Morrison had insisted. The department needs leaders who understand that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite the fear. The ceremony was attended by thousands, survivors of the fire, their families, firefighters from across the state, and citizens who'd been inspired by the story. Olivia spoke first, announcing that Sterling Global would be funding a state-of-the-art training facility for firefighters, as well as providing full scholarships for the children of any first responder injured in the line of duty. But the moment that brought tears to hardened eyes was when Lily Carter, now 8 years old and poised beyond her years, took the microphone. My daddy always tells me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, she said, her clear voice carrying across the plaza. It means you help people even when you are scared. That night, my daddy was scared. He told me later. But he went anyway because that's what heroes do. And Miss Olivia was brave too, because she stood up to her own daddy to do what was right. That's even harder sometimes than running into a fire. As the sun set over the city, painting the buildings gold and red, 3 figures stood together on the observation deck of the Carter Sterling building. Ethan held Lily on his shoulders so she could see over the railing, while Olivia stood beside them, her hand resting gently on Ethan's arm. They weren't officially together, not yet, but there was an understanding between them, a connection forged in fire and strengthened by shared values. Below them, the city sprawled in all its complexity, wealth and poverty, power and vulnerability, all intermixed in the urban tapestry. "What do you see, sweetheart?" Ethan asked Lily. The little girl thought for a moment, then said with the certainty of childhood, "I see home, and I see all the people Daddy's going to save, and all the good things Miss Olivia's going to do. And I see tomorrow being better than today." The story could have ended there, with the sunset and the promise of tomorrow. But life, unlike fairy tales, continues. 3 months later, another fire broke out in the city. A tenement building. In the poorest district. The kind of place Richard Sterling would have demolished without a thought. But now, Sterling Global's emergency response team was first on the scene, their new mobile command unit coordinating with the fire department. Olivia was there herself, having instituted a policy that senior executives respond to emergencies affecting Sterling properties. She worked alongside the firefighters, helping evacuate residents, providing temporary shelter and resources. When a reporter asked why a billionaire CEO was personally involved in such hands-on work, she replied simply, "Someone taught me that real leadership means running toward the crisis, not away from it." Ethan arrived with Station 19, and for a moment, their eyes met across the chaos. No words were needed. They both understood their roles, their responsibilities. He led his team into the building while she coordinated support outside. It was dangerous. These old buildings were tinderboxes, but no one hesitated. They'd all learned the lesson of the Sterling Global fire, that every life matters, that courage is contagious, and that sometimes the most unlikely people can inspire the greatest changes. As Ethan emerged from the building carrying an elderly woman, her grandson clinging to his back, Olivia was there with blankets and water. Their hands touched briefly as they transferred the survivors to the medics, and in that touch was a promise of partnership that went beyond romance, a shared commitment to service. The transformation spread beyond Sterling Global. Other corporations, shamed by the contrast between Olivia's leadership and their own practices, began implementing similar reforms. The Sterling Standard became a benchmark for corporate responsibility, not because of regulations or requirements, but because consumers and employees demanded it. The story of the firefighter and the billionaire had captured something essential in the public imagination. The idea that courage and character matter more than wealth and status, that bridges can be built between different worlds when people recognize their shared humanity. A year and a half after the fire, on a crisp autumn evening, Ethan finally asked Olivia to dinner, not a corporate event or a charity function, just dinner. They went to a small Italian restaurant in Ethan's neighborhood, the kind of place where the owner knew everyone's name and the pasta sauce had been perfected over generations. Lily was with Mrs. Chen, who'd given Ethan a knowing smile as he'd left, muttering something about finally in Mandarin. Over plates of homemade lasagna, Ethan and Olivia talked not about fires or corporations, but about books and dreams. About Lily's latest art project, and Olivia's secret love of old movies. They were just two people, finding each other across the divide of their different worlds. "I never thanked you properly," Olivia said, as they walked after dinner, the city lights twinkling around them. "For saving my life." Ethan shook his head. "You thanked me by changing everything, by becoming who you really are instead of who you were expected to be. That's worth more than words." They stopped walking, standing beneath a streetlight that cast golden circles on the sidewalk. "I was frozen," Olivia admitted. "For so long, I was ice, just like they said. But that night, in that fire, watching you refuse to give up something melted. Something I thought was dead came back to life. Ethan reached out, taking her hand gently. "Fire does that," he said. "Destroys and creates. Burns away what doesn't matter, and reveals what does." Their wedding, when it came, was small and perfect. Not the society event that Sterling weddings traditionally were, but a gathering of people who mattered. Firefighters from Station 19, survivors from the fire, Mrs. Chen in her finest dress, and Lily as the flower girl, scattering petals with the same determination her father brought to fighting fires. They held it in the plaza of the Carter Sterling building, beneath the memorial, because, as Olivia said, "We want to remember where we came from, even as we look toward where we're going." Chief Morrison officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. When he pronounced them married, the firefighters raised their helmets in salute, and Lily announced to everyone that she now had the best mommy in the whole world, even if she can't cook like Daddy. The reception was held in the community space atop the building, the same floor where Olivia had once been trapped. Now it was filled with light and laughter. Children playing between the tables, firefighters teaching Olivia's corporate friends how to properly hold a fire hose. They'd brought one as a joke that turned into an impromptu lesson. Richard Sterling watched from his prison cell, having been sent a news clipping by another inmate. The photo showed his daughter dancing with a firefighter, her face radiant with genuine happiness. For the first time in his life, Richard Sterling understood what he'd lost in his pursuit of power: not just freedom, but the possibility of real connection, real love, real meaning. As the evening wound down, Ethan, Olivia, and Lily stood on the balcony, looking out over the city. Other buildings stretched toward the sky, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Somewhere, a siren wailed another emergency, another call to service. Ethan tensed slightly, the instinct to respond still strong. Olivia squeezed his hand. "They've got it covered," she said softly. "Tonight, you're off duty." Lily, tired from dancing, leaned against her father's leg. "Daddy, tell me the story again, about the night you saved Mommy Olivia." Ethan smiled, lifting his daughter into his arms. "Well, sweetheart, it was a dark night, and the building was on fire." But Olivia interrupted. "No, let me tell it right. It was a dark night, and your daddy taught me what real courage looks like. He taught me that being brave isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing what's right, especially when you are afraid." The story spread beyond their city, inspiring changes across the country. Business schools taught the Sterling global transformation as a case study in ethical leadership. Fire departments used Ethan's rescue as a training scenario, emphasizing that sometimes breaking protocol saves lives. But more importantly, ordinary people heard the story and found inspiration. A teacher in Nebraska who stood up to an unfair administration. A teenager in Florida who ran into a burning car to save a stranger. A CEO in Texas who chose worker safety over profit margins. Each act of courage created ripples, spreading outward, changing the world in small but significant ways. 5 years after the fire, Lily Carter Sterling, she'd chosen to take both names, stood before her 4th grade class. For career day, she'd watched her classmates present doctors, lawyers, tech entrepreneurs. When her turn came, she didn't talk about her mother's corporation or her father's heroics. Instead, she talked about choice. "Every day," she said, "with the wisdom that comes from witnessing transformation, we choose. We choose to help or to hide, to build or to burn, to run toward problems or away from them. My dad chose to run toward a fire. My mom chose to change an entire company. But you don't need a fire or a company to make those choices. You can choose to help someone being bullied. You can choose to share your lunch with someone who forgot theirs. You can choose to be brave in small ways every single day." Her teacher, Miss Rodriguez, had tears in her eyes as Lily finished. The little girl had captured something essential, that heroism isn't reserved for firefighters or reformed billionaires. It's available to everyone, in every moment, in every choice, to put others before self. As Lily returned to her seat, her classmates applauded, and through the classroom window, The Carter Sterling Building stood tall against the sky, a monument not to power or wealth, but to the idea that courage and compassion can transform even the hardest hearts and the tallest towers. The ending, when it came, wasn't an ending at all but a continuation. Life moved forward, Ethan fighting fires, Olivia transforming corporate culture, Lily growing into a young woman who carried both her parents' strengths. There were other fires, other crises, other moments requiring courage. But the lesson of that night remained constant. That ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that love can bloom in the ashes of disaster, and that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the changes we inspire. The Carter Sterling Building stood as proof, its lights never fully dimming, always ready to shelter those in need, always remembering that from fire can come not just destruction, but transformation, redemption, and hope. As our story draws to a close, one final scene remains. It's another Tuesday, 10 years after the fire. Ethan, now fire chief, stands before a group of rookie firefighters. Olivia, her corporate empire now a model of ethical capitalism, watches from the doorway. Lily, 17 and headed to college to study emergency medicine, sits in the front row. Let me tell you about the night everything changed. Ethan begins, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Not just because of the fire, but because of what the fire revealed, that inside each of us is the capacity for extraordinary courage. You'll face your own fires, literal and metaphorical. When you do, remember, you're not just fighting flames. You're fighting for the belief that people matter more than profit, that courage matters more than comfort, and that even in the darkest smoke, hope can find a way to breathe. The rookies lean forward, absorbed in the story they've heard in headlines but never from the source. Ethan tells them about climbing through hell, about Olivia standing strong when her world collapsed, about Lily waiting at home with unwavering faith. He tells them about choices made in split seconds that echo for generations. And as he speaks, the afternoon sun streams through the windows of the training facility, the one Olivia funded, casting long shadows that dance like flames across the floor. But these flames don't destroy. They illuminate, showing the way forward for a new generation of heroes who understand that real strength isn't about being fearless, it's about being afraid and choosing courage anyway. From fire rose truth. One father's courage changed countless lives, humbled earthly power, and inspired a hope that spreads like light through darkness. Share this story if you believe that ordinary heroes can ignite extraordinary change, that love conquers fear, and that sometimes the greatest fortunes are found not in boardrooms, but in the hearts of those who run toward danger to save others.